get a link with an email with a link to view the video on demand in about a week. Also, there's a Q&A box on your screen, and we encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to those questions at the end via a verbal Q&A, but if your question isn't addressed live, Alien Vault will be able to follow up to you. So now I'd like to introduce our presenters, Garrett Gross, Senior Technical PMM, and Mark Allen, Sales Engineer. So guys, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, Emily. This is Garrett here with Mark.
Hi, Garrett.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Fantastic.
Excellent.
We're coming to you live from Austin, Texas in our brand new Alien Ball office.
$1 million studio.
Feels good in this 3-foot hole that they let us get in.
It's really cold, too.
It's really cold.
Well, anyway, we wanted to come together and talk about how to simplify PCI DSS compliance with Alien Vault USM. Because, Mark, as you well know, this can be sort of a dark art. It can be very laborious and cumbersome to keep up with. A lot of times you don't know how to get compliant or stay compliant. So this is an easy way to get the data you need and be able to produce reports to satisfy your auditor.
Absolutely, Garrett. And I know a lot of us got into IT well before PCI and compliance ever came into play. So many of us, you know, gotten into that we really need to be aware of and understand best practices. So yeah, like you said, it's often considered kind of a dark art, something that's a little bit tricky to get your finger on, to know how to do well, to know what best practices are around PCI and other compliance. So we'll dive into all that today.
Yep, and you know, compliance is necessary for those that kind of fall under those regulatory compliance standards, PCI, HIPAA, SOX, stuff like that. We're going to be talking about PCI specifically today, but just know that USM comes pre-built with reports for a myriad of regulatory standards out there. So what we'll discuss today, just a quick overview of what PCI DSS is. That's a good place to start, kind of understanding what that exactly is. Common challenges in PCI DSS compliance. Some questions that you can ask as you plan and prepare, which if you keep those in the back of your mind, you'll actually stand a good chance of going about this efficiently. Some of the core capabilities needed to demonstrate compliance, and then of course I'm going to turn it over to my smart guy Mark and show you how to use Alien Vault USM to simplify compliance. So without further ado, let's talk about PCI DSS. Now right now we're in what, 3.2?
I think is coming out, but we're in 3.1 right now.
Yeah, 3.1, 3.2 will be coming out here pretty soon.
Yeah.
What we've seen lately, or maybe like as of like a year ago, PCI DSS standards were somewhat lax, but as of 3.0, you had to really prove that you had been adhering to this over the last period of time that you're kind of held to.
Yeah, and previously, like you said, it was lax. It was kind of more of this, well, show us what you've got, and we'll take it under consideration. And a lot of times it was, well, as long as you're documenting the things that you're doing, that's pretty good. But yeah, you're exactly right. With PCI 3.0, things got a lot tighter. So now some of the 3 steps for compliance are going to be involved with this. So number 1, let's assess the situation. Let's figure out exactly where your assets lie, what the vulnerabilities are on those assets, and then 2, let's go and start remediating those, shutting some of those back doors, patching up some of the systems, and then 3rd, of course, you need to be able to return and report on that information and provide that to an auditor or team. And really, there's an underlying theme of the whole PCI mindset, and really that is to try to make payment security your business as usual. So often I remember, Garrett, running through a lot of different audits, and it was something that we would all kind of scramble maybe at the beginning, or rather the end of the quarter, or maybe the end of the year, when we knew that auditors were coming to analyze this information. We would really kind of make a strong movement, drop everything else that we were doing, and then try to patch those systems up and try to report on that. But I think it makes a lot of sense really to try to start doing that on a regular basis, daily, weekly, monthly.
You struggle with that? I mean, really all I had to do was slip the auditor 100 and I was good.
I can't believe you just said that.
just kidding, folks. And Mark's right. So the challenge here is that most of us are reactionary.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, hey, let's hurry up and get this done. However, the secret is if you just do this on a regular basis and stay compliant, not only are you going to save yourself time when the audit looms, but you're actually going to protect yourself. And it's always good to stay in best practice with PCI, especially if you collect payment information from your customers, which most of us do, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can't violate the customer's trust, right?
Exactly.
And not only that, but I mean, really, and Garrett said, you're going to protect yourself. You're definitely going to protect yourself against those auditors, but you're going to protect yourself in a lot of other ways too that you maybe hadn't even really thought of. And we'll jump into that here in just a bit as we continue to go through these slides.
Yep. So this is kind of the state of PCI right now. It's a really great report that Verizon puts out every year and is always chock with awesome data, really good quotes. And this one up here is actually a new one that we found that speaks a lot to the current state of PCI DSS. I'm sure everyone's read the quote, but in the last 10 years of all the companies that have been investigated by Verizon Forensics following an actual breach, not one of them were found to have been fully PCI compliant. So what does that tell you? Well, every single breach that we've seen had some sort of thing that could have been addressed by PCI compliance. So, again, staying compliant is the key. Getting there may be the difficult part, but, hopefully with the technology that we provide, it just makes it a little bit easier. So here are some of the PCI DSS requirements, or just kind of in a broad stroke, what the actual requirement is, and then the control objective on the left. And we don't need to read the entire table, but we can kind of see here, build and maintain a secure network, install and maintain a firewall configuration that can protect cardholder data. Well, that not only means install and maintain a firewall, but that also means make sure that configuration is rock solid, that there aren't any settings that you maybe left some vendor default password, you have some vulnerabilities that are known to be exploitable, and then of course maintain that and check against that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and basically just having policies enabled in that firewall. I mean, I don't think too many of us do this, but it certainly does happen. I mean, you'd actually be surprised to hear from some of the customers I've talked to that actually just kind of set up a firewall and leave it alone and don't really know what policies are on there. So
that was my experience. I mean, back in the day when I got, I was about to say hoodwinked, sold a firewall.
You were about to say that.
Well, sold a firewall. It was just pretty much like, okay, we got your check. All right, take it easy.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that that's what every firewall vendor does, but I mean that's usually what someone who is not in the know as far as security, they get that device and I'm like, great, I'm protected.
I'm protected. Yeah, exactly. And I think nowadays it's probably gone away quite a bit, but it still does happen. So I mean, just being able to prove to an auditor that, hey, I know what I'm doing. I've got this firewall configured, and I've got some policies set up, and I've got some active ACLs happening. I've got some dynamic blocking going on. I've restricted access to the actual firewall to only a few people that actually need access to it, which actually reminds me, if you look through a little bit further down this list, we've got one of these, requirement number 7, restrict access to cardholder data by business need to know. I mean, how many of us in IT have been given literally the keys to the kingdom on day one once you've joined that organization? I mean, so many of us just...
It has happened in almost every big company that I've worked for.
Yeah.
And now, what's funny is usually the smaller companies, your IT admin or whatever is reluctant to give you full control on day one. But oh yeah, you go work at blah 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 company. It's like have at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Domain admin.
Yeah, we just use the domain admin account. We just use the God account for everything. No, and it's true, but I mean, if you can really get down to the point where you're restricting that really on a need-to-know basis, it's difficult. It's a challenge because, again, in IT, having access is really vital to doing your job, but there are going to be some situations where you just simply don't need to have access to those systems. And so being able to implement that and show proof of that is also a hard requirement within side of PCI.
It is. And, a lot of these may not be directly applicable, like, we're not going to restrict physical access to cardholder data, but in most of these requirements, when USM is present and installed in the system, we can not only help enforce some of these requirements, but also check against to make sure that they're in place.
Yeah.
So some poor compliance when breached. This is a really great graphic. It's from the 2014 PCI compliance report, but it's still applicable today. You can kind of see up here on the screen, of all these different pieces of the puzzle here.
Yeah, I mean, one of them, if you look at the red bar that's at -4, showing organizations investigated after a breach showed less effective log management policies. What does that mean? Well, it really means maybe we were collecting some syslog data or some other, events from the system, but you probably weren't really doing anything with those events. Or maybe you weren't correlating them. Maybe you didn't actually know where the interesting security events were coming from those logs that you were managing. So that's really what that's speaking to, and that is a big indicator for these various different victims that were breached. The other one that you can see highlighted in red at -3.5 has to do with need to know.
Yeah, and as Mark talked about, that's not only restricting access to those systems, that's also putting in place things like network segmentation.
Yeah.
And, not physically locating those boxes next to your domain controller. I mean, have them in a separate facility,
Yep.
locked cage, or even in a colo or something like that.
Absolutely. I've definitely been in situations where we've completely physically separated the systems from the rest of the data center.
Absolutely.
And in fact, even done things so far as creating a root account that was only accessed for certain keys.